Let's kick things off with a huge question, one that's kept people up at night for centuries. Are the choices you make every single day really yours?
I mean, really think about it for a second. The decision to even watch this, what you had for breakfast, the path you're on in life. Are you actually the one piloting the ship, or are you just a passenger along for the ride? This, right here, is the fundamental question of free will.
For the longest time, the answer felt pretty obvious. Of course we have free will. The most famous champion of this idea was the philosopher René Descartes. He argued that our minds and our bodies are totally separate. He believed there was this kind of non-physical soul, the famous ghost in the machine, that does all our thinking and choosing, totally separate from the nuts and bolts of our physical bodies. But here's the thing. That idea, as powerful as it was, basically came from a philosopher's armchair. The real game changer in this whole story is when the question of free will gets up and walks out of the world of pure thought and right into the scientific laboratory. So yeah, philosophers gave us these giant mind-bending questions, but modern psychology came along and asked a totally new one. Can we actually do more than just have thought experiments? Can we use cold, hard data to test our own gut feelings about what freedom is?
And that's exactly what started to happen. You can literally trace this line from Descartes just pondering the mind-body problem way back in 1633 to Wilhelm Wundt opening the very first experimental psychology lab in 1879, all the way to today, where researchers are cooking up these really clever experiments to put our deepest beliefs to the test. Now, let's be clear. We can't just put free will under a microscope and prove that it exists. But what we can do is study what people believe makes a choice feel free. And by using these controlled experiments, we can finally move away from just speculating and start looking at actual evidence.
So what does free will actually mean to most of us anyway? Well, researchers have a really cool theory. They think it isn't one single thing, but more like a concept that's built from two key ingredients. Think about it this way. Is free will just an on or off switch? You either have it or you don't? Or is it maybe more like the concept of fruit? An apple is definitely a fruit, nobody's arguing that, but what about a fig or an olive? It gets a little fuzzy, right? The whole idea is that maybe some actions feel way more free than others, depending on what they're made of. And this idea leads us to something called the cluster theory of free will. It basically says that our judgment, our gut feeling about whether an action is free all depends on whether we see a certain cluster of features. And according to the researchers, two of those features are absolutely crucial. And here they are. The two main ingredients in our recipe for free will seem to be liberty and insurance. Liberty is simple. It means having real options, the ability to have picked something else. And insurance means that you are the true source of your action, that the choice came from your own mind, not because you were manipulated or brainwashed. Okay, so that's the theory, but how in the world do you actually test it? Well, you do it with a simple but totally brilliant experiment involving a character named Jill. So the researchers told people a story about Jill stealing a necklace, but they kept changing the details. In one version, she has lots of choices, and she makes the decision all on her own. In another, she has choices, but she's been brainwashed. In a third, she's forced to steal, but secretly, she wanted to anyway. And in the final one, she has no choice, and she's been brainwashed. You see how they're mixing and matching our two key ingredients? And the question they asked people was simple. In which of these cases did Jill act freely? So what do you think they said? The results were incredibly clear. On a 7-point scale, just look at what happened when both liberty and insurance were there. The freedom rating shot way up to 6.6. But as soon as you take away one or both of those ingredients, the ratings just plummet. It's clear that both of them matter a lot. Let me put it another way. A staggering 96% of people agreed Jill acted freely when she had both ingredients, the options and the personal control. 96%. That's practically everyone. But what about when both were missing? Only 30% felt she was free. That huge contrast shows that our gut feelings about freedom aren't random at all. They follow a pretty clear recipe. So what does all of this really tell us? Well, the results from this Jill experiment give us this really powerful look inside our own minds and our shared idea of what freedom is. So let's just break it down. It shows our gut feelings about freedom aren't some big mystery. They follow a very clear pattern.
For us to call an act free, we need to see both the ability to choose otherwise, that's liberty, and an authentic internal reason for the action, that's insurance. This experiment is just powerful evidence for that cluster theory, that our idea of free will is built from these very specific, measurable parts. And this gets at something even deeper. Free will isn't just some feeling we have inside ourselves, it's a judgment we make about other people. It's how we decide who deserves praise, who gets the blame, and who we decide to hold responsible for what they do. You know, the study's lead researcher, Josh May, he summed it up perfectly. He said that insurance and liberty both play a huge role. And when we can see both of them in an action, our judgment is clear. That person acted freely. So let's bring it all the way back to you. Now that you know the psychological recipe for a free choice, having real options and being in control, does that change how you see the decisions you make every day? That is definitely something to think about.